Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. It's a great pleasure to be joined today by Elie Pieprz, who does tremendous work on behalf of IDSF, connecting us, working with policymakers around the world. Elie, it's so great to see you here.
Moshe, it's great to see you. Looking forward to seeing you in person soon.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about that. We shared yesterday with our viewers what's happening tomorrow. We'll mention that a little bit later. But first, there's a little bit of drama right now coming out of the European Union. And I think it would be of great value if you can share with us what is happening.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Moshe. Um, I'll say that typically when I come on this, I like to speak about the U.S., what's happening in the U.S., and certainly there is plenty occurring in the U.S. and U.S.-Israel relations that it is worth discussing, and we'll get to that shortly. But I would be remiss if we didn't start by going back to November 2024, not in D.C., not in the U.S., but in Europe. At the end of November, we IDSF did hosted a little conference for members of the European Parliament in the actual European Parliamentary Building. It was designed to educate elected officials about the nature of the war, where we expected the war to go, some of the implications of the recent election dynamics in the US, as well as we pointed out some of the more egregious aspects of some of the European Union funding that was going to Palestinian and humanitarian causes, and making sure that Europeans understood how these funds will be utilized. And in some ways, those funds were being utilized to, actually to perpetuate October 7th. Some of those funds were being utilized to go ahead and to continue to rile up and to indoctrinate and incentivize terrorism, indoctrinate the Palestinians against Israel and against, and make them even more anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, things that the European Union and certainly the Parliament would not be supportive of. There were plenty of other things as well that even went beyond that, things that dealt with transgender issues that the European Union were unbeknownst to them were actually funding to the Palestinians, things that were, but it was big monies, big sums of money, and eventually ended up leading to a number of bills being passed in the European Parliament. Well, what happened since then is a media outlet based in Brussels got wind of what was happening, was very unpleased about the effect of our educational activities, and wanted to do an article talking about how we are very underhanded. What ended up happening was they wrote an article suggesting that we had been lobbying in the European Parliament, um, violating European law, which was not true. We had presented them all the information that demonstrated how we were completely transparent, and that everything was going, that we were doing everything as we were supposed to present. As we continued with our activities, a number of journalists started attacking us, and over the weekend, this attack, which was kind of small, ended up blowing up.
Because of the work of IDSF with the European Union, educating about what's happening in Israel, and specifically meeting with one of the vice presidents of the parliament. That vice president is taking some heat from some groups who have an anti-Israel sentiment. They're targeting her, they're targeting IDSF. And I think, by the way, it speaks to the efficacy of what you are doing, right? The fact that there are groups coming after us for educating people in the European Union means that we are making an impact. Let's now jump to Washington, D.C., right? In addition to your great work in Europe, you were just in Washington, D.C. with General Avivi, and you can't share everything about those meetings, but what highlights can you share with us?
Yeah, so thank you, Moshe. But great synopsis of what I discussed in Europe. Well, I'd say in DC, there's a real sense that Trump very much wants to make an impact. Obviously, we remember in his first go around, he created the Abraham Accords. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He really had a staple moments, and coming into 2024, we have a situation where Israel's at war, hopefully towards the end of the war. Trump really wants to try to achieve peace, not just with Israel and Iran and her proxies, but also, as you can see, what he's trying to do between Russia and Ukraine. He's really trying to be the peacemaker. And I do think it's quite genuine, and you can see the team he has surrounded himself, both in the White House and other envoys, special envoys in D.C. They are absolutely focused on trying to resolve conflicts and trying to get to a real comprehensive peace. Um, but I think that the president and his team that deals with Israel got a very valuable lesson, which they have taken very much to heart, with the beginning and really the first days of the administration. As you know, even before the Trump took office, he and his team were already working on trying to formulate a ceasefire hostage release deal, which he was able successfully to do, and one that Biden was not able to do. And when it happened, Trump definitely was very excited, as many were. Obviously, there were some downsides to the agreement as well, but ultimately getting a deal and seeing what could be done. Trump had initial thoughts, and this is my own impression, but that he had initial thoughts that this was going to lead in something much more comprehensive, something that would be beneficial to Israel, something that would allow us to move on to other bigger issues, which I think in Trump's mind is the expansion of the Abraham Accords and potentially other things that really put Israel in a much better national security perspective, puts Israel in a road towards legitimacy, success, and not ever have to worry about another October 7th. But I think that and this is something that I've heard from some of the people that I've heard off the record, um, as they started seeing the hostage handover deals, ceremonies that we all saw, it was clear that this was Hamas was not deterred. Hamas was not moving in any kind of direction of peace, and frankly was moving in a direction only of more hostility, and was using this. Frankly, was not just using that opportunity, but in Trump's mind, he was using President Trump, leveraging President Trump to only make this much worse and try to attack Israel and to keep the fight much stronger. And I think when that happened, you'll notice the tone that President Trump used when he was having the meeting with Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, in the Oval Office, where he said, "Kick him out, kick out all of the Gazans, wipe them out." Whatever the different terminology that he said, which were extremely direct, something that you don't normally hear from a head of state. Part of it was the frustration. He had thought in good faith there was an opportunity to generally create peace, and he now quickly understood that even if there would be some sort of short-term peace deal, he would put himself in jeopardy of doing the one thing which he doesn't want to do, which is look like a fool. And he remembers very clearly that President Bush had something very similar. And going back 20 odd years after 9/11, the U.S. was attacking in Afghanistan, eventually in Iraq, and Bush was very pleased that he thought that he had won the war back in 2003, showed up on a battleship with a huge banner that said, "Mission accomplished." And that ended up becoming the butt of many jokes because almost 15 years later, the US was still bogged down, still fighting very much those same wars. 20 years later, they were fighting those same wars. Trump understood that he was in jeopardy of facing that exact fate. That if you were going to rely on Hamas to have some sort of ceasefire, it was not going to have any kind of durability. It certainly was not going to last to the end of Trump's administration, and that there would be absolutely no ability for President Trump ever to state, "Mission accomplished. The war is over. I've achieved peace." That if he actually wants to achieve peace, which is a prerequisite, he understands, in order to expand the Abraham Accords, which is a prerequisite for him to state that, "Hey, I am a defender of the Jewish people. I am a defender of the state of Israel." He needs to make sure that happens. And if it can't be done through negotiations, and if it can't be done through a ceasefire, it can only be done one other way. And that is encouraging Israel to take whatever means necessary to go ahead and to finish Hamas, win the war decisively. And I think, what that means, I think is still, either as being worked out or is being communicated by the IDF to the administration. But I think it's an administration that is very open. If Israel is strong, Israel demonstrates that its willingness to fight the war completely, is not hesitant, but senses that it knows what it's doing and goes ahead and then goes out and accomplishes it. Trump does not want, or the Trump administration is not looking for a wishy-washy Israel that's going to go a little bit, then stop, that this problem drags on and on and on. He would very much want the misery to end, the killing to end, as he likes to say. And if that can be done quicker, sooner the better, regardless of what it takes. He knows war is messy, and that he also understands that Israel does everything in its capacity to to respect any civilians who are there. Although Trump also would have recognized that many of the so-called civilians may have lost the name, the shame of civilian based on many of their efforts to hold hostages, including American hostages, not try to save the hostages, work with Hamas. There's been very limited effort until the last few days, very limited effort of civilians resisting Hamas, and in some ways being willingly used as human shields. Um, and I think this is quite illuminating when it comes to another topic which is critical, which is Iran. There's a lot of discussion regarding the Trump administration. The Trump administration has often said, "Hey, we want a deal. We're also willing to destroy them." What what are they actually saying? They seem to be speaking out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. And I think President Trump does that intentionally and does that on purpose. He does that in our immediate conflict with Israel and Hamas in Gaza. But he's doing that also with Iran. And it's because Trump is saying, and I think the administration is saying, that if there is good faith effort, we will engage with them. But understand that this is not by the administration. We know what a good faith effort is. We're not going to be hoodwinked. And I think that's why there have been reports over the last few days, the last week or so, of a huge buildup of American power in the Indian Ocean. And I would say there's a reason for that. And President Trump, with all of his statements that from everything regarding tariffs, which I know is a big deal right now, Trump is talking about, is he going to fall through with them? Is he not going to follow through with them? You know, there's different opinions, and people have to make certain accommodations, and they have to make certain preparations. Iran is in the exact same situation. They don't necessarily know if he's serious or if he's not serious. But they very much know that Trump is someone that you cannot take for granted. Anything is possible. And when you present yourself in the way that the Trump has not just, remember, he started off with attacking jihadis in Africa. He has moved on to attacking very dramatically the jihadis, the Houthis in Yemen, in a way that no one has done before. Certainly, Biden would never imagine doing so. That is a very strong warning to what the U.S. is capable of doing in Iran. Iran's economy is falling apart. That is not by accident. That is by design. There is many efforts that both the U.S. And Israel are working, and frankly, many other partners in the West who see Iran as a very dangerous actor. There are some things they may don't want to do. When it comes to economic sanctions, that's something that the U.S. is pursuing much more aggressively. President Trump has spoken about secondary sanctions, meaning any country that doesn't put on sanctions, they will be sanctioned by the U.S. So it's not just that the U.S. is willing to say is interested in sanctioning Iran, but they will even sanction another country that goes around the U.S. to try to engage and basically provide revenue for the Iranian regime. Trump is very serious about trying to achieve peace. He knows that can only happen through strength, real strength, not talking of strength, but real strength. And I think we will see that both how Israel is going to be operating in the Gaza Strip, see that at first. And I think that Israel's and the U.S. is going to allow a certain level of discussions, communication with the Iranians go through, but ultimately they're not going to get distracted. I don't think the U.S. or Israel is going to be distracted or get hoodwinked and get sweet talked by Iran. I think they will be focusing until there is an opportunity to actually wipe out Iran's nuclear capacity, and hopefully that will lead to whatever changes can come after that in Iran that can give the Iranian people a very positive future, a future that sees itself in alignment with Israel, something that we're starting to see already in Lebanon and potentially even seeing in Syria. Um, Moshe, if there's any other questions, I know I've gone on for a little bit. Any other questions that anyone has, please feel free.
Definitely, Ellie. Thank you so much for all of that and for overcoming these technical challenges. The way you're framing the President Trump's agenda and interest in the Gaza war, it's so to speak that he can claim a success, that there has been victory. He's helped one of U.S.'s greatest allies defeat its enemies. So, in terms of looking at Gaza, there's a very clear objective of what needs to happen and the timeline to make it happen, to be able to say, yes, the Hamas has been defeated in Gaza. How does that work with Iran? In terms of the U.S. wanting to be able to also say, we defeated Iran, what exactly does that look like? Because Iran will still exist, the regime will still be there, even if there are targeted attacks, presumably on the nuclear site. So what would the goals of an attack or the length of time of an attack on the Iranian nuclear program mean for Israel and the U.S. in that regard?
Great question. I would say I think a attack on Iran, and I'm sure that I'm of all of the people, Moshe, that you have the opportunity to interview, I'm probably the person with the least military background. But I'll give it a shot. My background is much more into political space. But I would say that the goals, obviously, there are specific military goals in eliminating the ability of the Iranian regime to have a nuclear weapon that has an ability to impact Israel and neighboring countries as well. Um, the question is when should an attack like that happen? When an attack like that happen, how does the Iranian people react, and how does the Iranian regime react? The expectation is that the Iranian regime will do all that it can to clamp down and make sure that the regime is not in any kind of real jeopardy. The sense that they are presenting the sense that they are presenting to the Iranian people is that Iran is strong. If you ever have the opportunity to follow Iranian propaganda coming out of Iran in both in Farsi, in Arabic, and even sometimes can get translated into English, it is like a different world. You have to know you're reading a different reality. They have a sense that Israel is weak, Israel is falling apart, Iran is strong, Iran is resisting everything. And that's why when Israel did attack Iran, and Iran had very limited ability to fight back, they presented it to their people as if nothing really happened. They presented it as they shot missiles at Israel, and Israelis were scurrying into bunkers. They were so petrified of Iran. You see, Iran is so strong. That I don't think many Iranians or the majority of Iranians believe it, but enough at this point do that they're not willing to challenge the regime. However, if after almost a year, because I think we attacked Iran, it was about April, if I remember correctly, um, and if there was more and more, if the U.S. and Israel are able to attack Iran in a very consequential way, it will create a sense of uncertainty, of the sense that the Iranian regime is not able to protect itself, not able to protect its assets. Would that lead to Iranians resisting the regime in a more dramatic capacity? Certainly, after what we saw happen in Syria, what may be happening in Turkey as we speak, um, then it moves over into Iran. It's possible. It's also possible the complete opposite is that the regime cracks down so hard on any potential challenge to the regime that it becomes actually impossible and even harder. And I know there are for any kind of rebellion against the regime. Ultimately, as long as the regime is there, Israel is not out of danger because the regime, it's like water going downhill. They will continue going downhill. That regime will consistently try to threaten and attack Israel. Um, Hopefully, if we can get rid of the nuclear capacity, that is the most immediate threat. But they have other low-tech threats that they will continue trying until the regime is changed. What the strategy to change the regime is, I'm sure there are people on the inside who are working on that, but that's not something that I think that that Israel or IDSF is engaged in.
Again, Elie Pieprz is the director of IDSF International Relations, does phenomenal work, as you can all hear. So thank you for sharing all of that. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at our security conference. Again, for all of our viewers tuning in right now, it will be shown live on Channel 14 here in Israel. It starts 2 p.m. Israel time, 7 a.m. on the East Coast. So if you're an early riser, you can catch some really important programming about Israel's national security with leaders from across the spectrum here in Israel participating. We will not be having a briefing tomorrow because of that program, but next week I will look forward to bringing you some of the highlights of the program. For those of you unable to follow the Hebrew, I'll bring you some English translations thereafter. So thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We'll see you next week, Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.